I'm glad that I took the leap of
Yeah,
faith and, although imposter syndrome was looming at the time, I just
yeah.
had to say that representation matters.
hmm
And I'm glad that I continue to disseminate in that way.
Welcome to In the Field, the ABA podcast. I'm your host, Allyson Wharam, creator of Sidekick, an online interactive curriculum and learning portal for behavior analysts. We specialize in providing a fieldwork supervision curriculum in continuing education for ABA professionals. In this podcast, we're going to deep dive into the world of ABA, focusing on quality supervision as the foundation of our field. We're here for behavior analysts, business leaders, and trainees who are passionate about maximizing outcomes for their clients and improving the quality of their services with new and innovative practices. We're going to explore effective strategies and practices that not only enhance the quality of supervision, but also save time, all while investing in the people who make up our field, our clients, our trainees, and your everyday behavior analysts. So whether you're driving to your next in-home session or taking a break from your busy schedule, let's dive right in. Welcome, everyone. I'm here with Dominique Shorter Taylor, and I am so excited to talk to her today. We're going to be diving into dissemination, balancing work life as a BCBA, a mom, a wife, all of those different things. And I'm just excited to chat with her today. So, Dom, will you go ahead and tell me just a little bit about yourself and what led you to the work that you're doing today?
Yes. Hi, Allison, and thanks for inviting me on. So, just a little bit about myself. As you mentioned, my name is Dominique Shorter Taylor, also known as Dom the BCBA Mom, and we can get a little bit into that as we talk a little more about dissemination. So, I go by both names. I am from Chicago. I'm a BCBA here in Chicago. I went to the Chicago School of Professional Psychology, actually on campus. So, that's like a rare
That's
treat
pretty rare,
for
yeah.
it is. It's a beautiful campus, but I went to undergrad in South Carolina State University, which is a historically Black college university. And I didn't know anything about ABA. In undergrad, even in grad school, I came back home to Chicago and I got my master's in psychology. Still knew nothing about ABA. I thought I was going to be a marriage counselor or, something that fits neatly in a box. And my first job out of undergrad, I worked with adults with intellectual disabilities and developmental disabilities and dual diagnosis. And when I tell you I fell in love with the adult population like none other, and that's when I discovered ABA because there were a team, the behavior team is what they called them, and a team of BCBAs that work with the adults. And in the position that I was in at the time, although I had my master's in psychology, I was a case manager. And I wasn't really matriculating in the field. I wasn't making any clinical decisions about my clients. I felt like I wasn't doing enough. But then when I discovered, oh, the behavior team has a little more say so in what interventions are being tried or things that I thought really resonated with what I went to school for. That's kind of how I made the shift from just general clinical psychology and start learning more about ABA. During that time, I went back to school and I started getting my supervision hours at that company, which is also rare that, a company would be so gracious as to say, hey, you work here, but on the side, after hours, you can get your hours here. You don't have to pay for hours. And they just really made it easy for me to get that experience. I say it's easy, but to them, they probably feel like you worked for it because
hmm
ever since undergrad, I've always shown a level of leadership, a level of compassion, a level of just empathy when working with the clients that, I was 22 years old. I had a caseload of 25 adults and I had, DSPs working under me that were, twice my age. So it was just something about that work and that population where it's like, no, this is where I need to be. How can I benefit the clients that I serve now? So I learned more about ABA. I got my hours there. I finished my program. I passed the exam on the first try.
Nice.
Just a little
Yeah.
plug.
Yeah.
Something I'm really proud of it, of
Yeah,
myself
you should
about
be.
that,
Yeah.
especially because, I like to say when I talk about myself, I didn't know anything about ABA. I wasn't the smartest one in the class. I wasn't raising my hands for all of the answers. I failed some of my exams. I cried in the parking lot in between
Mm-hmm.
classes. Like, I did not understand the literature. And for me to pass on the first try, for me to be sitting here on a podcast talking about ABA, like, I would have never guessed that this would have been the outcome. So, I think I had a pretty much like a different route than everyone else may have had, but that's kind of how I got into the field.
Yeah, I love that. Well, and I think that speaks a lot to perseverance and not letting those
Mm.
little moments of doubt, because we all have them all throughout our entire careers, of not letting that moment crying in the parking lot define you,
Yes.
because we've all cried in the parking lot once or twice, so, and yeah, and here you are. So how did you have this beautiful platform for dissemination, like you mentioned, Dom the BCBA Mom. You are on YouTube, you're on Instagram, and then you also speak at a lot of conferences and share your knowledge and you just kind of get the word out in this way that I think what I value about it, at least, is that you're very approachable in how you do it. It's very real life and you're just unique in your style in terms of it's engaging and it's fun to watch, but it's also very educational. And so I am curious what led you through all of that journey to where you are now, where you have that platform and you really focus on dissemination in your work.
Well, thank you for that.
Yeah.
So that's a really good question, and I have to take it back a little bit. The only reason I started disseminating, I probably would say my first speaking gig was at my son's career fair. And I had to go around to like three different classrooms, a first grade class, a third grade class, and an eighth grade class, and tell them about ABA. And I was like, well, this is fun. Like, if I can get a third grader to buy in, then, I want to do that for more people. So I started doing it at my local church. I started doing it at teen parent organizations here or just community organizations. Specifically because when I found out that my son was experiencing early signs of autism, I did not have anyone to talk to about it. So we kept it on the hush hush. I knew about it. I consulted with my family members who knew nothing about autism. They weren't on board. It wasn't a part of our culture, right? So there are cultures and there are subcultures. In our subculture, it was not okay to receive therapy or to be labeled with diagnosis or to utilize anything outside of what we traditionally use, which is our faith, praying about it, maybe some discipline, maybe, just some of those traditional core values. So when it happened to me, although I was working with individuals in my career, when it happened in my home, I was frozen. I was stuck. I didn't know how to move forward with anything with my son. So secretly, I would still get him some services, and we did music therapy and social skills therapy. And I pretty much put him in any type of therapy that you can imagine, but I called it something else because I didn't have the buy-in from my community and from my family and from people that look like me. And it was just a very hard transition because we were doing it. It was like us against the world, you know? And so once I finally got over it, not to say that it's a destination because I'm not over it. My son, he's going to be autistic for the rest of his life, and we're going to have hurdles for the rest of our lives. But once I got to a place of acceptance, I realized that was hard. And I don't want another young Black single mother at the time to feel the way that I felt about just having a conversation, just getting an assessment, just talking to the teacher about it, not, you know, just dismissing it altogether. So I started the YouTube channel just to normalize the conversation of having a child with autism and some of the things that we do in order to change their behaviors, to make it fun, to make it less aversive, to make it less punitive. And from there, I got more and more comfortable with acceptance and with disseminating ABA in a way that you probably wouldn't see it written in the article, but that is more consumable to the people that I would see in my typical environment, to the point where I would get phone calls or direct messages on Facebook and say, "Hey, I love your videos. Do you think we can talk about my son? Do you think we talk about my daughter? Do you think?" And these are from young Black women who felt that it was okay because that one person that looked like them start making videos on YouTube and social media and going to churches and going to, radio stations and saying that it's okay for Black people to have a diagnosis, and this is how we can approach it. Should the approach be different? Absolutely, because there's cultural responsiveness, which we'll get into later, but we have to give ourselves permission first to say it is okay to address any mental health issues that may be coming up in your family. You shouldn't be ashamed. You shouldn't feel judged, which are all the feelings that I felt. So I felt like if I normalized it, maybe the next generation wouldn't have it so hard.
Yeah, that's really beautiful to have taken a really difficult journey and situation. And what it sounds like was that it felt very isolating, but you
Yes.
transformed it so that others wouldn't also feel that isolation in the same way, and that it would ripple out in your community. I was just trying to pull up the certificate data so I don't get it wrong too, because I think the other thing that is so important is that example for professionals, that not only to see a young Black woman from that parent perspective and that experience with autism, but also a behavior analyst that's in that position. Because let's see what it is. It's like, yeah, 5%. I was thinking, I knew it was the single digits. I wanted to get
Yeah.
it, but 5% of BCBAs and BCBADs
Are Black.
are Black. And so
Hmm.
that is having that example as well of, there is someone out there that looks like me who is from the same culture or same subculture. And I know it's not homogenous. There are a lot of differences in terms of subcultures and things like that as well, in terms of that experience. But it made me think too, you had attended previously an HBCU, and I think is there one HBCU that has an ABA program? Is that right?
Yes, it's actually it's funny you mentioned that. It's Savannah State University, and they from what I hear they're in jeopardy of losing that
Oh
program.
my
So we're
goodness.
trying to petition and do some things in the background to help keep that program up and running and hopefully create new programs at new
Yeah.
HBCUs, because although my YouTube channel started with me disseminating to parents, it quickly pivoted to me being the representation for aspiring Black practitioners
Yeah.
and increasing that number from, oh, I don't know, 3% to 5%.
Yeah. Yeah.
I have a lot of comments saying, I've never seen a Black BCBA before until I saw your YouTube channel. I'm so glad I came across the YouTube channel. And I'm like, me?
Yeah.
Like,
That's amazing.
I'm glad that I took the leap of
Yeah.
faith, and although imposter syndrome was looming at the time, I just
Yeah.
had to say that representation matters, and I'm glad that I continue to disseminate in that way.
Yeah, absolutely. So, in terms of cultural responsiveness, you had mentioned that and how critical it is to our work. How can we as behavior analysts do a better job of focusing on this, whether our focus is dissemination or just our general practice? What are some ways that we can really incorporate that? And again, that's another thing that is not a destination. It's not a
Mhm.
checklist of do cultural responsiveness, but what are some ways that we can start to do that in terms of our work as behavior analysts?
So that is a great question. And as you're asking that, I'm trying to look up this article that I often refer to. It's a Fong et al. Article. And just some of the things that they mention in the article is, first of all, you have to identify that we all have our own biases, whether that's,
Yeah.
I was having supervision the other day and I made a very small example of sometimes your biases can be small or they can be big, but they definitely impact your work. So, for example, if I'm working with a kiddo and the kiddo wants to play in muddy puddles, right? And in my mind, in my house, we don't play in muddy puddles. You get your shoes dirty, you get your clothes dirty, you get, like that's not what puddles are for. So I can be running a session and I say, oh no, we don't play with muddy puddles. And I'm inserting my bias onto that family. So instead of coming in with, well, identifying that you have a bias, and instead of coming in placing your bias on that family or the individual that you work with, first seek to understand what they value, their culture, their traditions, the target behaviors that they want to work on. One of my favorite terms is social validity, meaning, is this behavior important to this family? Is it socially acceptable to this family? Is this intervention that you're selecting acceptable to this family? Are they going to carry it out? Is it too complex? So I know as behavior analysts, we go through this rigorous program and we feel like we have all this knowledge, and we do. We are pioneers of change, but we have to first identify that nothing that we put out there is going to work or be accepted until we learn what the client values.
I feel like we focus so much on the objectivity of our science that we miss the fact that the whole applied portion of it
The
requires,
applied portion, yes.
that's all based on our perspective and how we approach that work and actually partnering with the people that we're working with when we do it rather than us just coming in. And that's where I think a lot of our training isn't very explicit on that at all in terms of just the general soft skills, but also cultural responsiveness. It just recently became really a part
I
of
was just going to say that it wasn't even an ethical code when I became a BCBA.
Yeah.
And now it's a thing. And I'm just like, well, where are the classes that are correlated with this
Yes.
cultural
How are we learning
responsiveness?
this?
Right. How are we teaching our students how to be culturally responsive? Because in the beginning, all we say is, where's the data? Where's the data? And the parent is looking like, do you know what I had to get through to get to this session? And you're asking me about some data?
Yeah,
So first, understand what the mom is going through. Like I used to tell this story that, the first time my son, I found out that he was on the spectrum, everyone was sitting around the table and they were doing their job. They were reading down the list of why he's on the spectrum and all the tests that they ran, and nobody really looked me in the eyes. And in their mind, they're like, checking a box. Bam, we got it done under 60 minutes, off to the next. And in my mind, I was just like mortified. Like I couldn't believe, like I said, it wasn't a cultural thing, that it's not something that we really accepted in our culture at that time. So just hearing those words, I was saddened. And as a practitioner, knowing how a family feels about that diagnosis, knowing how the grandparents feel about it, how do the aunts and uncles, is there buy-in, is there acceptance, is there awareness? How do we proceed? Do you want me to call myself the therapist, or do you want me to call myself his teacher? Because that makes a difference if you take me out into the community and I'm around other family members or community members and I'm out here and I'm called the therapist, right? That could be stigmatizing to that person. So really just leaning into what the family wants, what they value, and it's okay to still say, well, this is the science. I see what you want. I see what you value. This is the science. How can we compromise, take some data on it, and see if we can meet in the middle? And focus on this goal because that's very important to your immediate environment. And then maybe we can focus on some of the other goals once we get that one under control.
Yeah, I think just putting that partnership first above anything else. And like you said, just those constraints as well, from you have the cultural perspective, but also just the family culture, things like SES, things like if the parents are working, who is bearing the brunt of all of that. I guess what I'm looking for is just the general constraints, the environmental factors that are influencing that family from all of the different perspectives in terms of time and culture and all of those different things. And I wouldn't have even thought to ask that question of like, what do you want me to be called? That's such a powerful place to start. In terms of supervision as well, this kind of has me thinking, a lot of my trainees that I work with actually are people of color. And I have to acknowledge and think a lot about my own biases again in terms of like the dynamics of that relationship and power dynamics in terms of supervisor and supervisee. We talked about the fact that 5% of BCBAs are Black, but let me see. It's much more in terms of RBTs, it's 17%, right? And so I'm wondering also as a supervisor, we're talking about it in terms of clients, but as a supervisor, our trainees or supervisees are also kind of like our clients. So how can we be more culturally responsive in our supervision as well?
So I'm probably a little different, but I treat my supervisees the way that I treat my clients, the way that I treat my husband, the way that I treat my kids.
Yep.
And I wasn't always this way, but I realized if I can give this much grace to my clients and be this super BCBA, I can give that much grace to everyone else I worked with. And the reason I did that is because I had a supervisor who treated me like crap. Like, oh, it was the worst. Like, I mean, butterflies in your stomach every time he came around. But then the clients would come and he would light up and, hey guys, do you want? I'm like, oh my gosh, you're so fake. And I had to realize, why are we not giving the same compassion to our colleagues that we are to our clients? Like, we will rip each other to shreds. We will rip each other work to shreds. Well, you said data and not data, and you said Heward and not Hayward. I'm like, really?
Yeah.
But yet you'll give so much patience and precision and compassion to our clients. So I try to transfer that same energy, keep that same energy with whomever I'm working with.
Yeah.
I think that's my calling and my purpose in this world, is to just give people compassion. So even when it's a student, now, I'm not too nice because it's still my job to give feedback. It's still my job to make sure that you are the best BCBA that you could ever possibly be, especially in being under my credentials. But I don't have to tear you down to do that. I don't have to, humiliate you. And if I see that you have a deficit in certain areas, just like me, I've had supervisors that say, hey, I realize that you have very passive writing. You need to work on your writing. And I that was just the feedback that I had to take. So learning more about your supervisees and helping them build those skills. You could put your supervisees on a behavior plan. It can be a self-monitored behavior plan saying, I noticed that you are 2 days late on turning in all of your paperwork. Let's get you down to the deadline. And these are the procedures that we're going to put in place in order to get you there. So just the same way that I would approach ABA with my clients, I try to approach that with everyone that I come in contact with.
Yeah, that's so important. I've heard this joke. I don't know if you've heard it. That's like, what is the fastest way to turn a behavior analyst into a mentalist? To have them deal with their staff's behaviors. I'm butchering it, but essentially, as soon as you start to work with other adults, you're not a behavior analyst anymore. You start to just assign other things to people like, oh, they're lazy or they don't take
Yeah.
initiative or they, whatever. But really, we have to approach it the same way as
Yeah.
we do with our clients. You can have standards, but
Yes.
also
Yeah.
still hold someone accountable in a way that is compassionate and caring and supportive without being punitive. I really like that, just treating it the same way. And if you have a performance problem, you look at what are the root causes of that? How can I
Right.
support this person? How can I, again, help them with self monitoring or whatever it happens to be? And I think so much of supervision is working on those sort of skills for all of us. There's so much documentation and paperwork and keeping track of everything and just learning how to be a professional that we have to hold them through. And I think sometimes as supervisors it's easy to say, oh, they're an adult, like they should just do that. And it's not that simple. And that's
It's
not what we would do
not.
to our clients. We wouldn't say, oh, they should just do it.
Can we talk about that? Because when I first started supervision, I was at a university and my mind was blown by the amount of information I thought they should have known and they did not know.
Yeah.
Just regular professional skills, responding to emails or getting work in on time and I'm just like, You have to think about it. These are still students. I am still the teacher. If they can't learn the way that we teach, you teach the way they
Yeah.
learn. And I have to realize that everyone has a different learning history. Everyone has gotten to this point through different paths. And I have to be open. If I'm going to take you on as a supervisee, I have to be open to taking all of you
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. As a whole person, not just
as a whole
teaching
person. Yeah.
you the technical terminology. Yeah. I think that's so important. I think, you did some work on our RBT training, and in the RBT training, you talked a little bit about professionalism, but that's also one of the biggest topics that I've seen other business owners ask for, is like, that's really what we struggle with. Because again, it's the same thing. You're dealing with the whole person there. They're a professional working in
Hmm.
context. And for some of them, especially at the RBT level, it's their first
Yeah.
job, or at the BCBA level, it's maybe the first time that they're really responsible, not for just following what someone else is telling them to do, but to really have to be the one to take initiative. So there are new skills at every single level. Well, I know we're kind of pivoting around a little bit. The other thing I wanted to ask you, in terms of dissemination in particular, in terms of identifying the ways that work best with you, what tips do you have for someone to identify that channel? So it sounds like for you, YouTube was a really logical step, maybe because it's like long form and you're really trying to share those intimate details of kind of your life and what you're going through. But as someone is trying to identify where they're going to disseminate, how they're going to connect with others, even if they're not in a public facing way, if they're just looking at how do I connect or network or whatever. We were talking about Weeba before this, and I was talking to Shelby Dorsey about Weeba and who was going to be there, and she
Oh, hi,
mentioned you.
Shelby.
Yeah, she was like,
Yeah.
"Oh, Dom is the networking queen." That's, she dubbed you the networking queen. So whether it's public dissemination or more networking for someone who doesn't want to have a platform, what tips do you have for someone to kind of identify those channels and how to approach that?
Mm. I think you should find what matches your values. So, some people are really strong writers. Some people are really strong at speaking. Some people are more animated, like me, where it's like my facial expressions will tell the whole story. Or I'm really into videography. I'm really into, like, I had tons and tons of B roll before I even started my Dom the BCBA Mom YouTube channel. So, that was already calling me, right? So I think if you choose to disseminate in an unconventional way, it should be something that speaks to what you wanted to be before you even were a BCBA. So, for example, I've always been into theater, I've always been into plays and movies. So, when I decided to start disseminating, even on TikTok, I could make a funny video and like recreate it and make it funny because I get to act, right? And then I get to plaster a caption over it and make it ABA related, and then boom, you have content. But some people, they are just really good at creating the best memes that you will like. I'm like, where does your mind come up with this? Like, they'll take a movie like Mean Girls and then create like
Oh, yeah.
memes about how each character is a different ABA terminology, or some people are really good at writing articles and getting their articles published. So everyone has a different avenue. I say tap into your strengths. Some people love podcasting. I think we just need to give each other permission that if it doesn't look the same, if it doesn't look like what ABA was doing 10 years ago, 20 years ago, that's still okay. Because just the other day, we were talking about how I'm sitting here recovering from an ACL surgery.
Yeah.
So usually when I'm like down or recovering, I get my creative juices start flowing. And I just created a video and a week ago, and the video hit 2 million views on
Oh my
Instagram.
gosh.
And
Congratulations. That's
thank you.
huge.
Like that was my, I was like, whoa, what is going on here? But it was a video that had absolutely nothing to do with ABA. But when I saw it, it made me think of an ABA term. So I downloaded the video, I put a different caption on it, and then I put it out into the world. And now 2 million people know what airless teaching is
Wow.
through a funny video that they can relate to. So knowing that it can come up in any way, right? It doesn't have to be a journal published in Java. Or it doesn't have to be you speaking at a professional ABA conference. You can speak at your child's school. You can speak at, you know, the local daycare or whomever can benefit from this information. So, knowing that it can look different, it's okay for it to look different, and for us as a field to be more accepting of dissemination looking differently. The first time that I re-credentialed as a BCBA, I don't even think dissemination was listed as a specialty.
Yeah.
I was just out here doing it, you know. And then when I re-credentialed again and they said, list your specialty, I'm like, dissemination is a specialty? I
Yeah.
think I'll check that one. Sure, why not? Because I had been doing it, but I didn't feel like it was making an impact in our field until I started reading some of the comments under my YouTube videos, or I would go to conferences and people would like literally wait in line to say, hey, oh my gosh, I've been watching your channel since 2020, and and I'm just like, whoa, this really is making an impact. And I thought it was something that was a joke,
Mm.
not even a joke, but something that wouldn't be taken seriously in our
Yeah.
field. I didn't think it was a joke, but I didn't think it would also be taken seriously in our field. But I'm glad that people are taking dissemination in different ways seriously, whether it be podcasting or other social medias, blogging, whatever that is. People are looking for this information, and we need to be able to give it to them in bite-sized, consumable pieces so they can understand it and move forward with that information, whether they're a caretaker or someone who's just trying to get into the field. We can't have it too complicated. We can't have it in a place that's unattainable. Once you're no longer in school, do you have access to any articles or any, ABA articles? So how can we get this information to the people that actually need it? Last year was the first time I shared an article in a non-ABA journal. Well, shared an article in general, but it was a non-ABA journal. It was in a mental health magazine. And I thought it was huge that this mental health magazine reached out to me twice to ask me about ABA, because the people who are going to read this magazine may never have known about ABA because nobody really knows about
Yeah.
ABA. It's just a really small circle, so it's not
Mhm.
a widespread science,
Yeah. Yeah.
as
Or
widespread as it should be.
yeah, or if they do know, maybe they've contacted something negative or just incomplete
Yeah.
information or
Yes.
yeah, I think that's so interesting that it doesn't have to look like everyone else, making sure it's in alignment with what you are interested in and what you're good at, but also in what people are going to be able to receive. Is it consumable? I remember when I
Hmm.
first heard about dissemination or heard the word dissemination thrown around, because I think as behavior analysts, we use the word dissemination a lot, but maybe don't actually practice it in a way that is easily receivable by other people. So we just think of dissemination as, oh, I'm talking about behavior analysis. And if I'm talking about it, I'm practicing dissemination, when really dissemination is about that person actually being able to receive that information and do something with it. It's not just your actions, it's what someone is able to actually do with it. And so that's not going to look the same for everyone. And
That's
it's
true.
certainly for most people, for parents and things like that, is not going to look like a journal article. Not to discount that as another important way, but that's not the only way, or certainly not the way that people just in general are going to consume it. So yeah, so many great nuggets and all of that.
Thank you.
Yeah. The other thing that it kind of reminded me of is a business owner, often we're asked to basically become like content creators, even though like
Yes.
for me that that's not uh like I like creating instructional content. I don't like necessarily creating Instagram posts. And so it's easy to, if you're in that realm, I think feel like you have to disseminate in a certain way. Like, oh, I have to post on Instagram. That's a big reason why I started this podcast, is because this is authentic to how I like to
Hmm.
connect with people. This is
I can
authentic
tell.
to, yeah. Oh, thanks.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. That's what
Yeah.
I like to do. I don't like I like consuming Instagram posts, but I don't like to just
Right.
like create, reels, or I'm not the person to get up and like dance on Instagram or anything like that. It's just not gonna, or on TikTok. But, there is something, like there is a channel for everyone to share with others and share their knowledge and share and connect. So you just have to figure out what's authentic to you. So We talked a little bit about before we got on here, just balancing everything as parents, as wives, as caregivers, as people with professional lives, going through all of that. And then you layer on also this dissemination platform and everything else. So I'm sure people look at you and just say, how do you do all of it? I know people ask me that all the time, and I'm like, I literally have no clue.
I was going to
Um,
ask you the same thing.
yeah, yeah. I have a very supportive partner is a big piece of
Same.
it.
Yeah.
So yeah, so for you, how do you balance? And I know balance, even that is kind of a maybe not always the best word to use because sometimes it's imbalanced, but it's
Yes.
always kind of dynamic. So how do you kind of work through all of that?
So I would say that I started from the beginning prioritizing that my family comes first. Even with my online persona, Dom the BCBA Mom, people look at me as someone who is going to make sure her kids are taken care of first. So even when I go into a new job or a new space, that's a part of the negotiation. I'm saying that, hey, I have to drop my kids off at school. I'm the person that drops them off. I'm the person that picks them up. So all of my meetings have to be within this time frame, or I enjoy working with adults because working with children, I found myself really depleted
Yeah.
and I didn't have enough energy for my children when I got home, or even working with children. Sometimes you have to work evenings and weekends because that's when those children are available. And I wasn't available for my children. So I had to make the shift to decide what population I'm going to work with so that I can still be present in my children's lives. So those were things that were more, I had to put those pieces into play in order to align with my values. But I do really enjoy working. Like, don't get it wrong. When I am out and I'm seeing my clients, I am fulfilled. I have joy when I'm out and taking a walk with my clients or I see them just progress in an area. So I can't just be at home. Like right now, I've been at home for a month now, and I'm like, I just need to get outside. So I also had to learn that about myself, that working does rejuvenate me. Going to see my clients, not necessarily writing a treatment plan or the
Yeah.
paperwork, but there are certain parts of my job, even the content creation, that really like sets my soul on fire. So I'm leaning into the parts of my life that I enjoy and I try to prioritize those. Having a good support system is always good. And then having a flexible schedule can also benefit. So that's really why I got into this field, because you have a flexible schedule or you make a decent amount to where you can um, not spread yourself too thin. If you have to bring in help, whether that's childcare or whether that's extracurricular activities or just things to where you're not so burnt out, right?
Yeah.
Like if I'm spending 2 hours a day in the car, I want my car full of the best snacks. I want my car full of, I want my car to be clean. When I come home, I want my house to be clean. So I set things in place that will normally trigger me, just like a behavior plan. Like if I know that I come home and my house being chaotic is a trigger, then I may do some things before I leave so that doesn't. And that's where that flexible schedule comes in, right? So just setting things in place, having a plan so that sometimes you're going to drop balls, but making sure that the big ones that are important are not dropped.
Yes.
And I was going to say sometimes family is on the back burner, but I let my spouse know that, hey, I'm working late tonight. Don't expect me until after 8 o'clock. Make sure you have dinner because I have supervision. I'm seeing my supervisees. And after that, I may go out for a drink with girlfriends. Don't expect me tonight at all. And I have to be okay with that too and not have that mommy guilt or not have that
Oh,
guilt
that's so
that
hard.
I'm
Yeah.
not I'm not cooking a home cooked dinner
Yeah.
tonight or whatever that is. I recently got a Costco membership and I've been
Oh,
loving the where you go and get the cold
yes.
meal. You just put it in the
I
oven
love
for
Costco for
30
that.
minutes.
Yes.
That helps.
Yeah.
But yeah, just really planning out, identifying what your priorities are, what you value, and then plugging those in first, and then everything else should kind of follow that. and being assertive with the people around you, whether that's your supervisor, your spouse, my kids. My kids know that every other Thursday, mommy's not going to be home because she has supervision, and they're okay with that. And I had to
Yeah.
let them know. So just being assertive in whatever it is that you need to maintain that balance, because in this field, I mean, we can get burnt out very, very quickly. So if we want longevity, we have to prioritize.
Yeah, I found the same. Like, you have to figure out your negotiables and non-negotiables in terms of
Yeah.
what am I willing to give up? What am I not? What's flexible and what's not? And staying late one night every other week is that's okay, but staying late every single night, that's a non-negotiable. Or
Right.
I think adult services is truly the best kept secret in our field.
It
I did
is.
a little bit of it. And I actually saw a post on Facebook recently that was asking about work-life balance. And like half the comments were like, adult
Work with
services,
adults. Yeah.
work
I
with
need to
adults.
find that one.
Yeah, I'll see if I can find it. But yeah, it just, I think that there are opportunities. It's easy to get pigeonholed into the same thing, but understanding what your values are and that might change also. Like I've gone through periods
Yes.
where like or that you might have to course correct. Like I've gone through periods where I start doing something and it's like, oh, I'm doing supervision 3 nights of the week late where I'm missing dinner or coming in right at bedtime. And that's not sustainable. So I have to, you know, sometimes you don't know until you're in it and then you have to
Yes.
correct a little bit. But
Yes.
yeah.
Especially as new entrepreneurs,
Oh my
right?
gosh.
We're just like bootstrapping it.
Yeah.
We're trying to figure it out. We're trying to
Yes.
meet everyone's needs.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, I've been there.
Yeah. But that is where like you do have to really kind of love what you do and not to the detriment of your health or your family or anything like that, but you do have to have something that is going to sustain you, that lights you up. That like, yeah, I love to work. Actually, I almost have to I have to set those boundaries because otherwise I will go too far in one direction or another. Have you heard the analogy you mentioned like juggling? Have you heard the analogy of like glass plates versus plastic plates?
Hmm.
Of like when you're juggling, there are certain things that you have to keep up in the air and other things it's okay if it falls for a little bit, so you work with what you have capacity for, but there are certain things that it's like they have to stay up in the air no matter
And those are
what.
the glass
And those are the
plates.
glass plates. And then
I
there are
like
certain
that.
things that are like, okay, this can fall for a little bit and then we'll pick it
Yeah.
back up when we have capacity again. And that might also change. Like what is a glass plate might change from one moment
Mm-hmm.
to the next. It's a balance. It is a
It
constant
is.
readjustment. There's, again, we keep talking about it's not a destination. You're never going to reach a perfect balance, I think is the reality. It's that you're
Mm-hmm.
constantly kind of evaluating and reevaluating, and knowing your values and knowing all of that is really important to get back into balance whenever you kind of veer off track or whenever you have those decision points, because they're going to come up constantly of, do I take this
Mm-hmm.
on, do I not take this on, or do I, is this okay? The mom guilt is the hardest for me though, I will say. Like even when I'm doing what
Mm-hmm.
I love, just knowing like, okay, it's okay, my kids are okay if I don't spend 24/7 with them. And they're
Yeah.
better off when I don't spend 24/7 with them either, because I'm a better person when I also have a
Yes.
break. But it's hard when society also gives us these messages that we have to wade through with all of that. um so yeah, that was great. And being a mom of someone with autism, from that perspective as well, any advice for clinicians as they go in and work with caregivers? We talked about cultural responsiveness, but also just understanding the family dynamic, so both pieces of that. Any advice or tips or things to think about as they're entering that household dynamic and understanding that you are coming into a home that is more than just a place for services for this child, even if you're delivering them at school or at a day program or whatever, that you're entering this family system? Any advice or tips about that?
I would start with seeing how the family feels about the diagnosis and kind of starting from there. Just because they are getting services and they are welcoming you into their home, it doesn't mean that when the 2 hour session is over, that anything is going to be replicated or continued or even valued because of the place that they may be in when it comes to acceptance. And everybody's story is different. Like I volunteered with this group called Autism on the Seas, and it was tons and tons of family all had children and adults with autism. And we went to Belize and
Oh,
Honduras and
wow.
Cozumel. And I got a chance to just take off my BCBA hat and just mingle amongst families. And some people, they don't have time to accept it. It's thrown right
Mm-hmm.
at them. It's like, get the services. You really have no
Yeah.
choice. And then other families, family dynamics are different. So I wouldn't say there's one cookie cutter mold to when you enter into a family, but just observe first. You can ask some cultural humility questions. I know there may be some questionnaires out there to say, like, for example, what do you want me to call you? Do you want me
Mm-hmm.
to be called your therapist? Do you want, when we're out in the community, how would you like for us to be addressed? Or how likely are you to continue this when I'm not here? Like, does this fit into your schedule? Is this feasible? If I'm saying, hey, this person should have, you know, social skills class on this side of town, and then you have to go see the psychiatrist on that side of town, and then you have to go see OT on that side of town, and then you have three other kids, and you have homework. With it is what I'm saying really going to be the first thing on your mind. I have to really know the scope of what the family is dealing with in order to see where ABA can fit into this person's life so that we can plan for generalization because we're not always going to be here. It's our job
Right.
to lose our job. So we want to make sure we fit nicely into whatever they have going on so they can continue it when we leave. So those skills can generalize when we're no longer there across different settings, across different people, and across time. Sometimes when you are having those parent trainings, that is not the time to have your all of your ABA technological jargon. You
Mm-hmm.
may want to have a couple of just catchphrases. If you see yourself saying positive reinforcement a lot, or extinction, or shaping, you may want to have some really quick terms where you follow it up with an example that clicks to them.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not like you're talking over their head. And then they are more willing to accept the interventions that you have set in place. Um, and not taking it personally if they don't follow your instructions. Just continue to, hey, if they don't, I would say the same approach you use with the client, use with the parent. If the parent is not following through the treatment plan, well, let's identify the function of the parent's behavior and let's identify the value of the parents or the community. What's motivating them? Where's that lack of motivation? And approach it in that way with that type of compassion.
Yeah. So many good nuggets in there and so many good pieces of just connecting with the parents and making sure that what we're doing is socially valid, but we're not assuming that it's socially valid that you're talking to them and connecting with them and asking those questions, asking them like, do you want to learn some of this terminology? Do you want me to just use lay terms? Priming them and saying like,
Mhm.
hey, I sometimes use these terms that because I use them all the time, I forget that they're not everyday language. So stop me if you ever need.
Yeah.
And, all of those things about just speaking in that everyday language. I like the piece about not taking it personally too, because again, it's easy to center ourselves because we're there to do this job. And so we're laser focused on that piece of
Mhm.
it. But that is one piece of this dynamic life that these people are, it's their life.
Yeah.
It's not just services for them. And so understanding that we're just a little piece of that. Yeah. Oh my gosh, so many good nuggets. Thank you for
Thank
all of that.
you.
I have one last question. If you could go
Okay.
back and talk to yourself when you were just starting your dissemination journey, when you're just starting to post things and you're a new professional, what would you say to yourself or what lessons would you go back and try to instill in yourself?
If I were to go back to 2019, Dominique, when I first started posting, I would say to her, this is your way of impacting this field. So when I first did it, oh my gosh, I did it so scared.
Yeah.
I did it. I promoted it, but I didn't really promote it. If someone were to recognize me, I would cringe. I would I wasn't really fully walking in my purpose, not realizing that it could. it is having an impact on our field. And I wish I would have presented that way a lot earlier. It all worked out in the end. You know, God has his perfect timing, but maybe I could have missed something by not walking in my full purpose as, you know, I'm Dom the BCBA Mom and dissemination is my specialty. So let me show you all the different ways to disseminate, even if it doesn't look like what you think it should look like, because hopefully that'll inspire the next generation of BCBAs to start disseminating. And now parents who don't know these ABA terms, now they have a list of content creators they can learn from and learn these terms at their own pace. So by the time you come back, they're like, hey, I've been watching this content creator and I know what a behavior shaping procedure is now because she broke it down
Yeah.
into, you know, into consumable steps. So just owning it a lot earlier, owning leadership qualities, being a supervisor. I don't think anyone passes their BCBA exam and says, now I'm ready to supervise. I'm
Oh
like, I'm ready to get out
gosh.
there. But I think that is one of my strengths. One of my superpowers is leadership and maybe walking into that purpose a lot
Yeah.
sooner or with more clarity and knowing my worth then. So
Yes.
just because I've never published an article, not to say I never will, I just never have. I felt like because I've never published an article that no one would want me on their podcast. No one would want me at their professional conference. No one would want to hear from me. But a lot of people want to hear from me. And I've
Yeah.
never published an article. So I just want to let all of those aspiring BCBAs, future BCBAs, current BCBAs know that the modality that you get the word out is totally your own. Just own it and walk in that purpose.
Yeah. I love the do it scared. I feel like that is the beginning of
Yeah,
any of, if you wait till you feel ready, you will never do anything.
right.
Just,
And
you
then
have,
that potential client now doesn't have that service that you were
yeah.
supposed to offer because you were too scared.
Yeah, exactly. I know I said that was going to be my last question, but I'm curious, what kept you going when you were scared or when you were feeling that imposter syndrome or who am I or, cringing, like you said, when people, what kept you going and persevering through all of that?
The comments.
Oh, yeah.
I know a lot of people say turn off the comments. The comments are scary. My comments were so positive, and it's not like I was reaching millions and millions of views, right? So I couldn't say it was the number. It wasn't the frequency. It wasn't, oh, 100 million people watch my videos. It was actually reading the comments, and three or four people would say, oh my gosh, I'm so glad I found your channel. You just don't know how much this meant so much to me. And I was like, okay, well, that just reinforced my behavior to keep
Yeah.
going. So I always say it's the comments for me.
Yeah.
It's my
I love that.
feedback. It's that reinforcement.
Yeah, that's critical to keeping going with anything, that reinforcement.
Yeah.
So, I love it. If others want to connect with you, if they want to find your YouTube channel or Instagram or just connect with you in general, where can they do that?
Well, first, you can find me on YouTube, Dom the BCBA Mom. That's where you will find most of my content that's long if you really want to learn and be entertained, but most of that is educational. And then when I got tired of that, I got satiated during the pandemic. I went to TikTok and I got a little,
Nice.
silly with it. It became a little more fun. The videos are shorter, so the reinforcement is a lot quicker. So I have a TikTok page, which is also Dom the BCBA Mom. And then also I recently started doing Instagram Reels, which is Dom underscore the BCBA Mom. You will not be disappointed.
No.
Either channel that you go
Yeah.
on, either channel you go on, you're going to come back with something.
Yeah, I totally agree. Awesome. Well, thank you so much. It was so fun chatting with you today, and I learned a lot and got a lot out of this conversation. So, yeah, thank you for being here.
So thank you for having me. I look forward to working with you more in the future.
Yes, likewise. Thank you so much for listening to In the Field, the ABA podcast. Don't forget to visit our website at www.sidekicklearning.net for more resources, our comprehensive fieldwork supervision curriculum, and continuing education opportunities. If you enjoyed today's episode, please consider subscribing to our podcast and sharing it with your colleagues and friends in the ABA community. Your support helps us to reach and empower more professionals in our field. Join me next week to continue to explore innovative practices and foster quality supervision in ABA.